Hello to everyone that has joined so far. We will wait a few more minutes for the audience numbers to go up. We're expecting about 40 people. So give us 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll kick off the second session of the Biotech Commercialization Series. Okay, I think we'll slowly start the introduction and warming up for the day and let people join as we go. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining the second session, the second webinar in the series. For those of you who didn't join the first one and weren't able to watch it yet, I'll go through a little bit about what we covered in the first session and kind of how this leads on from that. We'll be joined by two guest speakers who I'll introduce a little bit later. But for those of you who didn't join, I'm Hannah from the OneBio Innovation Center. This is the Biotech Commercialization Series, where we're really trying to just host a series of conversations about what's going on in biotech locally in South Africa, in the Western Cape, and then also how this fits into the global context right now. A little bit about what we're doing at OneBio, and then our overall goal is just to bring this whole ecosystem together a little bit more to start really catalyzing some of these conversations that we believe will lead to a much stronger pipeline and hopefully a lot more startups in the space and a lot more senior students exploring opportunities beyond academia. So with that context, a few housekeeping rules. I know we did this previously, but for those who have forgotten, we can't see you, everyone in the audience. Please communicate through the public chat, which you can find on the right-hand panel. We can see everything you're saying in there. Please keep it super friendly, conversational. You can drop resources there while we chat. You can add to the conversation or just ask questions. We're really trying to keep it a little bit informal, just having light conversations. And if there's anything that you want us to follow on from, you can also ask us in the chat to give you some more context, and I'll try and send through more information after the webinar. Perfect. So with that, yeah, I'll introduce today's session. So last time we really spoke about kind of slowly getting ourselves into this mindset of, okay, if you're in the audience's kind of point of view, if you're a senior student or a researcher in an academic institute, how do you start bridging this gap? How do you start going from academia to looking at kind of where there's a market problem that you might want to solve? How do you bridge this gap and how do you go from academia into an industry setting or potentially starting up your own venture? We heard from Diego Castillo and Sarah Carroll from two different startups, BioMine Health and Mary Health Solutions, and they really set the scene of how they did this in kind of our context from a local university, how they really went from being a student to being a founder, the challenges that they're still finding along the way, and how that early stage step looks. let me quickly go to my screen. Cool. So today we're really going to go from this whole founder mindset into validating your idea. So you're working at university, you've done your research, you've not gone through your postdoc, et cetera, whatever stage you're at. But how do you really bridge that gap going from starting to establish a founder mindset and then understanding, okay, I have this technology. Now what do I do with it? Who's going to buy it? Which market does it fit into? That really early stage of kind of customer discovery and market fit can be really challenging. And it does require a bit of a mindset shift from the scientific research that we're used to in a university or a research context. So today I'll be giving a bit of a framing and introducing our speakers. We'll be joined in part one by Nick Walker, who him and I will have a bit of a chat about the current market context that we're seeing and what's happening at OneBio. Sorry, I'm just letting people in as we talk. And there we go. And then we'll have a bit of a short break. And in part two, we'll have Nick Enslin from Immobazyme. We'll really talk about this in real practice. So what they've seen in building Immobazyme and how they look at kind of the whole commercialization journey and how this has really changed their technology and what they've been developing. And along the way, we'll have open questions in the chat. Cool. So introducing the speakers, as I mentioned, Nick Walker and Nick Enslin. Nick Walker is a partner at OneBio Venture Studio, so we work quite closely together. Nick Enslin is Chief Commercialization Officer and co-founder at Immobazyme. And he'll join us in the second part where I'll give a bit more of an introduction. So Nick is really working across company creation, fundraising, and commercialization. He's really passionate about bridging this gap that we've been speaking about, turning kind of world-class research into scalable, investable businesses. He'll kind of give us this framework of what he's seeing right now, what OneBio is seeing in the local context, and how this fits into kind of the global biotech startup landscape. A little bit about his experience with this kind of problem solution fit conversation that we have, and how you really go from research to understanding who your customer is and who your end user is. So Nick really sets the scene, and then we get this framework lived in practice from Nick Enslin about what Immobazyme is seeing right now in their market, going from this kind of we have a technology to here's who's actually buying it, why they need it, and how we have to tweak our technology to fit that. Cool. So to set the scene a little bit, I don't want to be too repetitive, but really just trying to get everyone into this mindset of if you're doing kind of research at a research institute or at a university, we're really focused on scientific novelty, kind of what are we seeing in literature, what has been researched before, how can I further this, how can I find something novel. It kind of has a discovery mindset. And then shifting this into something that fits in practice and fits in the market is really looking at this gap between brilliant discovery and scientific novelty, and then going to who's actually having this problem. And sorry, I was meant to be on this slide. Who actually has this problem, and is my technology, is my science actually going to solve this problem? And does it actually work in the market that I'm trying to put it into? So this kind of gap where years of development and heavy capital gets pumped into, often there's no validated customer. And this is kind of something we're seeing at the moment. You really have to understand where this is going to fit and how it's going to fit into that market and who's going to buy it for it to become something that's really viable in a market. So keep this in mind as we are joined by Nick Walker, and we'll kind of speak about this a little bit more. So really, again, this brilliant science, it's not the same as a viable product or viable technology in market. The question really goes from, is this good science, to who cares about this problem and why now? And this is exactly what I was speaking about, going from the research lens to the market lens. So research lens, we really look at optimizing for novelty and rigor, starting with the technology, and then hunting for where we can plug this technology in, which is where scientists often fall short. You can't plug a technology in if you haven't really solved the problem first, and if this is not really solving the real problem that we see in the market. So having these conversations early, understanding how this is going to fit into an existing system and how this is going to solve those pain points, as well as it being economically viable and kind of affordable with the market that it's trying to fit into. Instead, we want to shift to the market lens where we're really optimizing for the value that we want to deliver, be it at a higher quality product, higher efficiency, yield, whether it's cheaper, whatever it might be. I'm oversimplifying this, of course. I'm really just trying to set the scene. So yeah, just shifting towards a market problem, knowing that we have this painful problem and understanding how we can develop a technology that fits into that system rather than the other way around. I'm just going to check if we have any questions as I go. Or Rodrigo, I'll leave that to you in the back end. Cool. So this is kind of our core idea. Not just plugging a solution straight in. Most researchers begin with the technology and then look for places to use it. We really, really want to encourage the shift to kind of a commercial approach where we invert this. We find a real problem and we try and understand how to work from like a design mindset of, okay, how are we going to fit our technology into this, or how are we going to develop technology that fits into the existing system? Who actually has the problem? Is our technology actually solving the problem that they have? What are they doing about it today, and why isn't it enough? Why is the technology that I'm developing better than what exists on the market? And then obviously evolving and iterating this as it goes, understanding that it's not just a one fit solution, a one-time check. We have to iterate on this and understand how this will evolve. We'll also chat a little bit about, with Nick, I'll chat a little bit about kind of your end user versus your customer. A lot of the time in scientific research, we find that we focus on the end user and not specifically the customer, and understanding the difference between those and how to, who to speak to first, who's going to buy it, the difference between the people living with the problem and the solutions that they're looking for, who's actually holding the budget and is going to pay for the technology that you're developing. And then all of the decision makers and stakeholders along the way, someone who decides, the influencers shaping these decisions, which is obviously normally regulators, can go to kind of government level as well. So understanding this whole pipeline in deep tech, that can be quite confusing and sometimes a little bit detached from each other. And then this is kind of the whole intention behind today's session, is really just talk before you build. Often we can go really far with our research and think that we have something amazing that we can plug into, a solution that we can plug into the market, but we haven't really spoken to the people who are going to take this up, either the end user or the customer. So really just having these conversations early, speaking about your science early. I know scientists, myself being one of them, get really, really passionate about the work that they're doing and the problem that they're solving without really understanding if it is solving that problem. So let's have more conversations earlier, and hopefully we go from the kind of scientific novelty mindset to finding a market fit. And with that, I hope that is kind of good context. The rest of the session now, Nick will join us. So I'm just going to see if he is on. Nick, you can come on screen. So I'm going to let Nick do a little bit more of an introduction to himself, give a little bit about his background, how he got to where he is, and as I said, speak about the kind of context that OneBio is seeing right now, how they're thinking about venture building, and how they really see this, bridging this gap between science and kind of going into market. Nick, if you want to give a bit of an introduction.
Cool. Thanks, Hannah. Appreciate that. And thank you to everyone listening. Really do appreciate being here and being able to tell our story. So to take you back A little bit about myself. I am a scientist by training, as many of the people within our organization are. I didn't enjoy being involved in the lab too much. I enjoyed the commercialization or business elements of biotech from a very young age, and knew I wanted to be involved in it in some way. And ended up, after graduating with my PhD, moving to Johannesburg to work at a biotech firm called Next Biosciences. And it was at Next Biosciences where I really kind of grew the passion around the commercialization of biotech and products that are based on deep technologies. I worked in a business development role there before I was lucky enough to have an incredible opportunity to attend an organization called Singularity University. And ironically, through that experience, I learned a little bit about some of the themes that are being spoken about today around, sort of understanding the market and understanding what the real problems are that you're trying to solve with a product. To give you a little bit of context on that, and I'll move on to kind of the founding of OneBio after that. But the brief in order to get into Singularity University, which is an organization based in Silicon Valley that is fairly well known for in sort of tech circles as being a think tank. And the goal of Singularity University is to bring people together from all over the world to create companies that are impactful. And essentially what they see is a lot of people building photo sharing apps and some of the brightest talents in the world going towards that sort of resource where we should really be trying to solve big problems in the world. So that's the ethos of Singularity University. And so their brief, in order to get into the program, was you have to propose a solution to a problem that, if you're successful in providing that solution, would positively affect the lives of a billion people within 10 years. So obviously an incredibly lofty ambition. And I looked around and looked for big problems within sort of our ecosystem. And one of them, obviously we know is a massive problem, is HIV and AIDS. And being a stem cell biologist, I sort of thought there was only one solution to that problem, and that is to use some incredible science in order to solve that problem. So what I proposed was a stem cell bank of genetically engineered cells that were essentially immune to HIV. This was inspired by, many of you may have heard of the Berlin patient, a patient in Berlin who had leukemia, who received a blood transfusion or a stem cell transfusion. And the donor who he received that transfusion from was naturally had a natural mutation which made him immune to HIV. And it actually, this Berlin patient was HIV positive and a leukemia patient. And the treatment actually cured him of his HIV as well. So there have been a number of these cases, but my idea was to kind of really mechanize this and be able to take stem cells from the umbilical cord, which is one of the things that is done at Next Biosciences, genetically engineer them to be CCR5 negative, and then reinfuse them to people with HIV. It got me into the program, and one of the first activities that we had at that program was really trying to dig into the problem of the proposed solution that you have. And it wasn't very long after digging into really the problem, and I think this is exactly what Hannah's trying to get to today, is having an understanding of the problem allows you to know whether your solution is any good. Having spent some time on the problem itself, soon realized that the solution wasn't appropriate. Essentially, it was elegant scientifically and scientifically feasible, but the actual process to do this is a very expensive process, obviously pretty dangerous for the patient. And the existing solutions to someone with HIV, things like antiretroviral drugs, are improving all the time. And people generally, it's being treated more as a chronic condition at this point than needing a cure. Obviously, a cure, if there was such a thing, would be fantastic, but something as technical, expensive, and dangerous probably wasn't the right solution. Having investigated the problem even more, we started to identify, and I started working with a fellow team member who's also passionate about this problem at Singularity. We started to realize that the problem was more around less technical and more practical aspects. So people that are infected with HIV generally can live quite a long time before having symptoms, but are able to pass on the disease during that time. But are never diagnosed because they aren't sick until they've maybe passed the disease on. So really, one of the most impactful areas of that problem space, being HIV, is early diagnosis and incentivizing people to be diagnosed early, and then getting people onto antiretrovirals, which lowers the viral load significantly enough that they actually stop passing on the virus altogether. So a far more practical solution would have been far more impactful. So I've definitely been down this road before. of seeing the value in trying to understand a problem, and definitely going down the wrong route because of the scientific background that we have. And there's a saying that if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And I think that is something we all need to be aware of as scientists trying to build our companies. Onto a little bit about the progression into OneBio and some of the work we're currently doing. I returned back from my program at Singularity University in 2016, where I'd actually met my co-founder, a guy by the name of Michael Fickard, who'd attended the program, also South African, attended the program a year before me. And we then started to apply some of our learnings from this program to try and find a problem worth solving in Africa. And what we found was that um, OneBio is essentially built on the belief that there's really strong talent, scientific talent, and entrepreneurial talent in Africa, but very little of that is being translated into functional companies. And what are the reasons for that? We believe we did an analysis of the ecosystems that are successful around the world, think places like Boston and others, and found that there were consistently three elements. One being really strong science, which we believe we have in South Africa. The other being support ecosystems. At the time we started OneBio, there were no OneBio innovation centers or co-working labs or infrastructure or programs, frankly, like the one that we're running at this point, that Hannah's running. And then lastly, investment capital. There wasn't any investment capital, private sector investment capital to invest in startup companies. So we set out to create these three elements. These two elements. The science obviously already existing. We raised some money to build a lab. We then raised money to invest in companies that we found that are biotech companies. And we've fully committed. That first fund was about 100 million rand. We made 11 investments from that fund, all in deep tech biotech companies. And we are now essentially fundraising for a second fund. We've done a first close. We've raised a little bit more money than we had in the first fund, but aiming for around 350 million in total. And we're looking to deploy that capital. We've made 2 investments out of the second fund already. And so that's on the fund management side, but OneBio as a group consists of 3 elements. Obviously, you know about the OneBio Innovation Center, you know about the fund manager, which I've just mentioned. And the last element is the venture builder. One thing we noticed from Fund 1 is that often scientists who are super talented come to us with ideas that are either underformed, underbaked, or kind of just what we think is kind of barking up the wrong tree. And we worked with a number of companies in our first fund to do some venture building. So actually working with founders from a very early stage, before there was a company, before there was a really well-formed idea and problem solution fit. Actually working with the founders to refine those ideas. And we've now raised some money to do that more aggressively internally, and that's the Venture Builder program. So it essentially caters for if you're an early stage founder with some technology, or you are an entrepreneur who wants to come in and build a company. We've got some capability to now in-house that at our facility in Cape Town. Hannah, is that a good enough intro? Would you like me to touch on anything else?
No, I think that's great. Just like you kind of, we speak obviously internally a lot about your experience at Singularity and that whole kind of first lesson around really understanding, okay, how is this going to fit into the market that I'm actually trying to solve this problem for? But maybe a little bit more about your kind of perspective now from the One Bio Fund and from the venture building side. I mean, you guys obviously get a lot of people coming to you with new ideas. You get a lot of pitch decks sent to you. You get a lot of people kind of barking up your tree for capital or trying to get in on the venture build. What are the kind of trends that you're seeing right now with this whole conversation context in mind? What are the trends that you're seeing right now? Is it true that, like you just said, a lot of people come to you and they don't really have a fully fleshed idea? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing are kind of a trend throughout all of them? And then in what kind of sectors or industry are you guys really interested in right now? And what are you looking for in these kind of pitches?
Thanks. And I think maybe to start off this conversation, it's best to understand some of the constraints around what venture capital is and how it works. So venture capital is essentially money that we've raised from investors to invest in startup companies. The idea being we buy some of the company from the founders. Those companies then increase in value as they become more and more successful, and then we're able to sell our shares for a profit and return that money to investors. it's an incredibly risky job, and the general consensus is that you probably lose 9 out of 10 companies don't succeed. So you need one to do really, really, really well. And what that means from an investor perspective is that we need to, when we're looking at a company, we need to be confident that every investment that we make is capable of providing profits to the funds. That means, for instance, if we have a 100 million rand fund, we make a 10 million rand investment in a company, we've got to be confident that our 10 million rand investment can make more than 100 million rand in the long term. So what that means and what that naturally selects for is companies solving really big problems, companies that are super ambitious, and obviously other elements, things like competitive advantage. But you know, we see a lot of companies that come to us that have got really good business models, good business ideas, but if they're wildly successful, won't return us more than the fund. And I think one of the aspects that we see to that, or one of the characteristics of that, is quite often we see biotech companies pitching to us that want to solve a local problem. So, for instance, it's very expensive to get reagents. It's timely, etc., or costly to get reagents from abroad, very specialized reagents into South Africa to the research community. Let's produce them locally. And I think that's a great idea. I think that's something that should be done. I think it fills a proper sort of need in the ecosystem locally. But the challenge here is really, can a VC fund like ours get the type of exit, the type of profits when we sell our shares that makes sense to make the investments in the first place? And the answer is usually no. The markets in South Africa or Africa are pretty small for biotech products. So again, you can make a really good business case and a really good business, but the return profile isn't there for us. So we see that quite a lot. We see a lot of companies using biotechnology somewhat for the sake of using biotechnology. So, for instance, you know, to again harp on the idea of getting reagents into Africa or into South Africa, we think that could be a logistical problem that could be solved with better logistics, maybe some AI tracking orders and expediting shipments and those kinds of things. You could probably solve a lot of that problem without creating a high-tech biotech company kind of on the continent. So we always look for that kind of trap when we evaluate companies. Is this company solving a real biotech problem, or is it a logistics problem solved by using biotech? And as I say, as a VC fund, we can't be investing in companies that are using sort of biotechnology as a means to an end. What we do look for is companies that are essentially potentially addressing a massive market, and this is usually international markets that will be both beneficial, obviously internationally, but also to Africa and South Africa, but critically doing that in a way by which they have a competitive advantage against any competitors they may see. So what you don't want to do is create a company that is in a highly competitive space with no competitive advantage. It's just too difficult to do. You want to find a company that is addressing a massive global problem, but that has unique insights or a unique way of solving that problem. And I think that comes into a lot of what you've been saying, Hannah, around understanding the problem. Often, if you have a really strong understanding of the problem at hand, you gain unique insights which give you a competitive advantage in order to solve that problem. And that's where things get really exciting for us, and that's where we start to really look to support companies and solving things in that way. In terms of the venture build program, maybe just to touch on quickly, we see a lot of great technology being created at the universities and research councils. And the venture builder for us, we're hoping it's a program that's just started, so we haven't got many proof points on it yet. But the hope is to be able to access a lot of technology that's at the universities and research councils to be able to create companies around them, should that technology provide, as I say, a competitive advantage to solving a big problem.
And maybe on that, just to kind of follow on briefly, are you kind of seeing, I know that a lot of the work that you're doing now is really trying to understand what research is coming out of the universities. Some of the conversations we've had is that our universities aren't usually, I mean, we have incredible science coming out of some of our universities, but they're not really poised to go straight into markets. So they don't often have that business angle or have that kind of market fit built into them. The kind of problem is definitely very scientific novelty discovery, looking at local problems. If you're looking at infectious diseases, obviously, like we're saying, um, do you think that, or are you seeing in some of the research coming out of universities that they are poised to fit into this model, or they need a lot of tweaking to really be able to solve the problems that you're seeing in that way?
So I'd say it's obviously each bit of technology that's developed at a university falls on somewhere on the spectrum,
Hmm.
and we see a bit of a blend. So we see some company or some technologies that we think are super interesting and have a very clear commercial fit kind of right now, and then others where the science may be more observational but really interesting findings that may be able to be translated, given some time and effort and resources, into something that is really interesting for the market side. So obviously, if there's absolutely no market application, it's not something we'd look at. But usually, we try our best to find if there's really interesting science that is observational in nature, but it's cutting edge. There's often a way to find something interesting about that or a competitive advantage to a specific problem. And that's something, again, to be quite wary of. And one of the lessons I'd say is not to try and find problems to fit the technology to, but quite often, if you understand the level of a scientific breakthrough, and specifically if it is a real scientific breakthrough, often opportunity can come from that. So there is a difference between trying to force fit a, a solution onto a problem and being opportunistic, but you have to be disciplined about that.
Yeah. Um, Something I was thinking of now, I mean, I know that I'll touch on this with the other Nick that'll be joining us in the second half, Nick Enslin. I know he's going to give us a real kind of real world example of how Immobazyme has gone through this kind of entire context of problem solution fit and how this changed their technology development. But from your angle, kind of what is some advice that you would give in this process? We're speaking very broad stroke here and kind of framework, but it's a lot more complicated in practice, and to actually
Mm.
understand how to really understand your market and how to really understand your end user problem versus who your customer is and how this technology is going to fit into their system. Is there kind of a way that you see this being done in some of your portfolio companies that has been really successful? Or yeah, what is the kind of best way to go about this in the early stages?
Yeah, I think this is obviously a good question to be sort of practical about. I think the first thing to do is potentially model the experience I went through at Singularity University, which was the brief was really spend a few days or a few weeks even on just the problem. Don't worry about the solution. Don't even think about the solution. Really understand the problem and present the problem to people. So go and convince people that there's a really big problem. Try and understand every aspect of the problem, every driver of the problem, every player, every kind of every person that's affected by this problem. And if you can start to do that, you create a really strong foundation. So I wouldn't start with market analysis and those kinds of things. I think that's a step too late. You should really understand the problem first. And when you can do that, I think you end up identifying new users, new potentially impacted people by this problem. And then you can start to go kind of a level deeper. And what I do a level deeper, you said in one of your first slides, is speak to people. Speak to if you have you've identified a problem and it's say a medical problem that you want to try and solve. Go and speak to as many people who are involved with dealing with that problem currently. If it's oncology, go and speak to as many oncologists as possible, because you will learn a lot about the way the problem is currently being addressed that you don't want to learn once you've created a product or a service. So if you do that and you find out that no one would pay for this, for instance, there's a big problem. So validate that there is a problem by speaking to people who face that problem on a daily basis. Once you've validated that there's a problem, try and validate at a conceptual level what your solution may be. So I think to sum this up, Hannah, and you said it pretty well in your early slides, speaking to 40 people who are sort of intimately involved in this problem is way better than a prototype that you haven't really validated with the end user or the payer. So definitely consultation before you spend money on creating some sort of prototype or solution.
And from the kind of investor seat, is this something that you look at in founders that are pitching to you? How much do they understand the problem? How many people have they spoken to? Are these kind of questions in your due diligence that really come up?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, we highly prioritize founders who've got significant experience within a particular vertical.
Cool. I'm going to actually switch over. Sorry, I see that there's a lot of questions coming in on the chat that I've been missing. Which one of them is actually, I'm going to try and put it into context of what we were speaking about now. This whole like looking for valuable IP in universities and incredible technology that's coming out, and then how can we plug it into something? Sometimes that doesn't work. sometimes, like you said, there is really valuable science there that can actually be tweaked and find a problem for it to solve. But that maybe not being the ideal way to go. Someone asked in the chat, could you maybe comment on what the involvement of the university would be in the startup? Like, will
Mm.
the university take majority share as they provide the technology? Um, and maybe we can kind of put this in context of, I don't want to say it's controversial, but maybe a new way of looking at things. Often we see, okay, let's build this pipeline by taking university IP and plugging it into something. But maybe there's a new road for scientists to go, okay, I learned valuable skills at university of scientific problem solving. How do I now go into the real world and find this problem that I want to solve and then build my technology from it? But first, you can comment about the university's involvement in startups and what that looks like currently.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there are a number of different ways in which this pans out. So, as Hannah mentioned, the one kind of lightest touch one is that you go to university, you learn a whole lot, and then you leave university and start up a startup based on the skills you've learned. And the university would have no kind of ownership in that case. You're just applying the skills that you've learned. Um, an in between step is where university creates intellectual property. That intellectual property may be protected by a patent, and a company, an external company that's not owned by the university, can license that technology on specific terms. In that case, it's obviously a negotiation, but usually the company that licenses the technology will probably not have an equity share held by the university. The third case is where a university actually creates a spin-out company. And in that case, obviously the university holds equity. It's usually not a majority stake. It's usually a minority stake. In really developed ecosystems around the world, it can be as low as like 5% equity with a royalty potentially attached to that as well. In South Africa, those equity stakes are generally a bit higher, but certainly not a majority stake. And it's important to mention here that it is, publicly funded research. It's important to for the country to protect that intellectual property and for the universities to be somewhat incentivized to create technology that is applicable in the market. And therefore, I think the best way to do that is through having a shared incentive in something like equity or royalty. So it's often seen as kind of something that somewhat of a bugbear to startups. It is also important that publicly funded research is protected in that way. So yeah, it depends very much on the technology. It depends on the agreements, and these agreements are fairly fluid and negotiable.
Cool, thanks. That was a question from Xander. Xander, we also have a session on IP and institutional support later in the series where we'll hear directly from university TTOs as well as some IP attorneys where they speak about this in depth and really the different kind of models that this can take and how to access that at your specific university. So stay tuned for that. I think it's September or October, but you can see the full schedule. We'll send it to you after this. And Jonathan asked, I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with the Stanford biodesign process, but if you are familiar with it, I was wondering how applicable you feel this would be for biotech startups. Are you familiar with the Stanford biodesign process?
I'm not 100% familiar, unfortunately, so I'd feel unqualified to comment.
We will skip this one, Jonathan, Jonty. I know that you've been coming to some of our in-person events, so maybe we can pick up the conversation at our next startup stories and you can share a little bit about this. How accessible are university TTOs and how open are they to commercialization of the science produced within their universities? Are they even aware of what can be commercialized and are equity deals viable for them? So it's a bit of a follow on
Mm.
from our previous question. Um, what is your kind of experience with the TTOs at the
Um,
moment?
I would say it varies between TTOs. Some of them are more sophisticated than others and better resourced. Really, is kind of the reason for that. Some of them, I think, from a top down kind of direction from the vice chancellors of the universities, etc., have been made more aware of the need to commercialize research and the potential upsides of doing such. Obviously, there are various universities in the world that are really good at this, and I think end up being a really important part of the university's budgets is kind of revenue through royalties and exits. So I think it is becoming more. South African universities are becoming more aware of the potential to have significant upsides from doing this, and I think as they become better capacitated, which some of them have become really well capacitated over the last few years, we'll see improvements in this. In terms of them having the ability to identify the technology, I think in general they do. There are a lot of patents that are being created. Obviously, things can be improved. Obviously, things can always be done better, but I think in general it's done pretty well. And then are equity deals viable for them? I mean, obviously the long holding period of equity deals is a challenge, but the commercial challenges of royalties can also be somewhat of an off-putting aspect to investors into university technologies, especially if royalties come off kind of revenue, which is a challenge. So yeah, there's a balance that needs to be struck. And if universities are long-term thinking, which I think they should be, and in most cases are, equity can work.
Awesome. Yeah, we've definitely seen, I mean, a huge improvement even just over the 2 short years that OneBio Innovation Center, at least. I know you guys have been around for a lot longer. But our engagement with them has definitely improved. A lot of the local
Mm,
universities are really eager to engage and to understand how to commercialize a lot of this research and how to better position the research being done at the universities to follow on and to kind of poise them for going into spin outs or startups or just exploring commercialization at least. So definitely an upward trend, but it might be a bit of a slow kind of road to walk. I'm going to let people pop a few more questions in. I know there is one waiting for me, but pop a few more questions in the chat. We have a few more minutes with Nick before we go on a break. Nick, I want to leave with kind of my final question is what what kind of problems are you guys looking at? Are you interested in from the fund? I know you and the rest of the team at One Bio Venture Studio spend a lot of the time ideating and just brainstorming and discussing some of the problems that you're seeing globally that you'd really love to find companies in that space, even if it's just a specific industry. But yeah,
mm.
what is kind of the conversation behind closed doors for you guys that you're really looking at um, investing in?
Um, we like to look for ecosystems or industries that we think are somewhat broken, and we think that certainly the drug development industry is pretty broken. It's actually a law called Eroom's law, which for those of you who know Moore's law, it's Moore's law spelled backwards. Essentially, that every drug that gets the FDA approval is costing more and more and taking longer and longer. So there's definitely a a problem to be solved within drug development, and so we like companies that are innovating around drug development. Um, we also like companies. We've invested in a future of food company in the first fund. That is an interesting space as well. We do think the food industry will change. The future of foods as an industry has sort of softened in the last few years. It's a little bit less investor friendly, but we do still think that the food systems are largely a lot of room for improvement. I wouldn't say broken, but a lot of room for improvement. And that could be in agriculture, it could be in crop development, it could be in new types of food or new types of proteins and that kind of thing. Um, Industrial processes we think are interesting, but very difficult to get a competitive advantage. We typically look for companies. Maybe this is the real ethos. It's such a silly analogy, and we every time I say it, I say we have to come up with a better analogy, and I never do. But if you were a biotech entrepreneur, kind of alien, what are and you had to choose somewhere in the world to start your biotech company, what are the biotech companies that would be started here in Cape Town or in South Africa or in Africa? Because there's a competitive advantage to do so. So a lot of people, and they'd be right, there are a lot of disadvantages to being on the southern tip of Africa, but there are also a lot of advantages which may make it worth it in the long run. So things like we're the most biodiverse continent. If you can find a competitive advantage in biodiversity, that's great. Um, we've obviously had some success stories in the country around Kappa biosystems, for instance, that make it possible. But having a competitive advantage helps a hell of a lot. Yeah, I hope that helps, Hannah. Just on the one question that Stephen asked, the three elements that we think make a successful ecosystem, just to make it very clear, there are obviously a lot more elements and a lot more things that are required. But the three main ones we have are scientific talent, as you've got, access to capital, and the third being support organizations, things like the OneBio Innovation Center that provide accessible, affordable access to lab space and this type of support. So these are three main elements we've identified, but there are many more.
Awesome. So yeah, I think I'm gonna give it 2 minutes just for people to ask any more questions. But great. I think this is, well, we got a very long question. Give me 1 second to read it in the chat, Stephen. Um, So it's touching on you kind of using the problem solution argument of logistics
Mm,
versus an actual biotechnology problem on the continent. Stephen's asking, would it not perhaps be worth investigating operating two tiers of venture funding, lower risk companies with lower returns, but contributing towards establishing a richer, more resilient local biotech economy,
mm,
and a second tier of current risk profile projects with higher upside?
yeah. I think it's a really good question, and you may have a case for this. I think the nature of the funding that you receive dictates the nature of the investments that you make. So the investments that we have are high risk and expect high returns. Certainly, there are other types of funding possible for less risky bets. It's just not what we do. So again, I don't want to take away anything. I agree with you that there is a significant risk to local ecosystems without these problems being solved, but it's not something that at this point we can finance with the money we've raised, but certainly could be something that could be financed through a different risk tolerant type of financing. So a good question and a good point.
And are you seeing that space open up for these type of companies, kind of having a
Yeah,
low risk manufacturing focus?
there's been a lot of talk around certainly vaccine manufacturing and the industry around vaccine manufacturing, so reagents for that kind of thing, being sort of supported on the continent. So we are seeing that, and that's mainly through grants, some conditional debts, and that kind of thing, which are great to have. I mean, we'd love to see these industries thrive, but there's just got to be enough of a business case to keep them going. So, yeah, there is funding for that. It's usually grants and sort of concessional debt and that kind of thing.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone else, for asking questions in the chat. We're about time for our break now. So we're going to have a 10-minute break and come back at 11, where we will be chatting to Nick Enslin from Immobazyme. He'll give a bit of an intro to what they're doing at Immobazyme, how they kind of walk this journey of really understanding where their technology fits into, and how, as they evolve, their kind of approach to building their technology and finding their customers changed along the way. But thank you, Nick Walker, so much. Thanks for joining us. If anyone wants any follow-on information from Nick or myself on this, you can always come to our in-person events. We're there for a chat and a bit of networking afterwards, or you can just pop us a message on our info email, info@innovation.onebio.africa. You can ask any questions there or ask for additional resources, and I'll do my best. If there is a big kind of response in having a follow-on session with us, I'm sure Nick will be more than happy to do another Q&A session online. So let us know. Let us know if you found it useful, if you have any kind of other topics that you want us to cover. But for now, let's go to our break, and I'll see you back here at 11. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Cheers. Um, can someone give me a thumbs up if you can hear me now? Okay, awesome. Cool. So welcome back. Thank you for everyone who's still here after the break. I'm going to introduce Nick Enslin now from Immobazyme. Nick is the CCO, Chief Commercialization Officer at Immobazyme, who is really passionate about kind of figuring out what is both scientifically possible and commercially viable. And this is kind of his role at Immobazyme. He is also co-founder, so he's been there from the beginning. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. I'm not sure if I think you were involved in the first half, so you kind of heard us setting the scene with other Nick and have a little bit of kind of context for what you'll now be taking us through. But I'll hand it over to you to take us along the whole Immobazyme journey, give us a bit of your background, and then really how the whole walking the commercialization journey has shifted things at Immobazyme and how you think about scientific research.
Awesome. Morning, everyone. And thanks for having me, Hannah, as well as Nick and the whole OneBio team there. I want to start by being honest about what this talk is about, because it's definitely not a success story, or at least not a straight one. It's a story of every time how we got commercialization wrong at a time before finally getting it right. And there were a lot of mistakes. Like most of you, I'm a scientist, and a few years ago, I knew how to express a protein, but I had no idea how to solve it. So this is a talk I wish I had or someone had given me back then. So firstly, who are we?
Sorry to interrupt you, Nick. Some people are saying in the chat that your mic is a little bit faint. If you can maybe just speak a little bit more into the computer, do a little test.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Can someone give a heads up? I mean, a thumbs up if it's better. I think just continue. And if I can ask the audience, if it's still giving you problems, just mention it in the chat again and we can try and solve it. Thanks. You can go ahead.
Sorry, guys. I also have a little bit of a soft voice, so I'll speak as loud as possible. So firstly, who are we? Like all the greatest ideas in history, Immobazyme started over a beer between friends in a crowded street and pub. We were still doing our masters at Stellenbosch University, and we had a lot of enthusiasm and we had a technology, but we had zero business acumen. And so we were good at the science, but we were kind of making it up on the business side as we went. And we made the classic scientist mistake again and again. We pretty much assumed that if the science was clever enough, the customers would sort themselves out. And spoiler alert, they certainly do not. So a quick brief on what we actually do. So we take a microorganism, a yeast or bacterium, and we genetically engineer it to make a specific protein. Then we purify that protein out and lyophilize it and package it for sale. So precision fermentation, it's basically like brewing beer, but except telling the cells to make alcohol, we tell them to make a specific high-value protein, a antibody, a nanobody, a growth factor, an enzyme, structural proteins, peptides, you name it. So why does that matter commercially? Well, a lot of these proteins are extremely valuable and they exist in a wide range of industries. So if you can manufacture them locally and affordable, you've got something that people want. So right when we started, we were like, cool, what do we make first? And right at the start, we joined Launch Lab and started Countdown, which is a program that drops you straight into customer discovery. They teach you a method, and it's a Steve Blanks approach. And it's pretty simple. Find a problem, go talk to the people who have that problem, build a rough prototype, put it in their hands and get feedback, and then iterate from the beginning. And we learned this method so well that we could have recited it in our sleep. But knowing isn't doing. Yes, we had the technology, but we had to actually go out and do it. So the first real problem that we picked was in the sugar industry. In sugar processing, there's a contaminant called dextran. It's a gummy, high molecular weight polysaccharide, which costs the South African sugar industry over R1 billion in losses every year. And we developed a thermostable dextranase that breaks this gum down into smaller, simple sugars. And so a good, genuine, painful problem and a product that solves for it. So far, exactly what you're supposed to do, right? And then we hit our first wall. We were sitting across from these serious players, big guys, and they asked us a very reasonable question. We process tens to hundreds of sugar an hour. How much enzyme can you make? And the honest answer was nowhere near enough. The technology was ready, our execution just wasn't. We'd fallen in love with the problem without checking whether we could actually serve the people who had it. So Lesson 1 from today, and it sounds obvious until it happens to you. Match the market to what you can actually deliver at the size you actually are. A brilliant solution isn't brilliant unless you can actually deliver it. So we went back to the drawing board. And by now we'd raised a bit of money and we'd built ourselves a lab. And so the scale problem was easing. And at that exact moment, cultivated meat was having its big bubble. Companies were raising hundreds of millions of dollars to grow meat in bioreactors. And one of the most expensive ingredients in their whole process was growth factors, the proteins that tell cells to grow and differentiate so that you can get a lab-grown meat steak. And we looked at that and we thought, that's it. That's exactly the kind of protein we can brew. It's high value, low volume. It's what we could do at this exact scale. So we bet the next year or two on making these growth factors. Now, what's that saying about fool me once? Because hadn't we just learned a hard lesson about proper customer discovery? We'd forgotten everything we learned at Launch Lab and Steve, what's his name? And we just put our blinkers on and started making every growth factor under the sun. EGF, FGF2, IGF1, TGF-beta1, VEGF, KGF, PBGF, a whole shelf of them. And honestly, our team was firing. We got so good at the science that now we can almost make any recombinant protein you put in front of us. So that was a benefit. But commercially, it was a disaster. We ended up with a freezer full of products and not a single paying customer. So when we finally went out and did the customer discovery, the discovery we should have done in the beginning, 3 things came back and each one stung really badly. Number 1 was it was the wrong product. We'd made human growth factors and the market wanted animal origin growth factors. Bovine, chicken, pork, tuna, you name it. 2 was the wrong price. We assumed that we could charge a premium, but behind the scenes, the big players were vertically integrating these manufacturing capabilities. And there were cheap supplier deals going around that we weren't even aware of. So we were being outpriced. And 3 was wrong timing. The bubble had popped and cultivated meat companies that we were building all these growth factors for were going under. So, lesson 2, validate before you build. And just as importantly, be willing to pivot when the market tells you you're wrong, which thankfully is exactly what we did. So 2 things saved us here. The first was luck, and I'll be honest with you, it was luck. Those growth factors that we'd over manufactured thankfully found a second home in cosmetics, as well as our next product, which is coming out, which is a 1-to-1 FPS replacement. And the second thing was we sat down with a large South African food manufacturer and they explained their problem, an essential enzyme that they were importing at a huge cost. So this time we ran the playbook properly. We went back to the lab, built a prototype in about 2 weeks, put it in their hands, went back and forth with them to get the product right. And now that enzyme is monthly revenue for us. So lesson 3, solve a problem the customer already has. Only then do you build a prototype and iterate your way to revenue. That order really matters. So this one conversation that we had with a large South African food manufacturer kind of changed the whole way we do business. And it's one of the most useful lessons that I can maybe share with you today. When we started, we sold our work the obvious way, which was pay us upfront for the R&D and in some sort of SLA format. And customers hated it. It turns out very few companies want to fund research, even when the payoff for them could potentially be huge. It just feels like a cost without any upside. I mean, who wants to do some sort of research SLA for a raw material? They just want to buy the raw material. So we flipped the whole thing around, and now we don't walk in selling R&D. Instead, we ask one question: what problem are you stuck with? and we carry that cost internally, maintain the IP, and just drop off a product that they buy monthly. Same science, completely different conversation. One of them is us asking for money, and the other is us solving their problem. And the second one wins most of the time. So just a brief little interlude before we get to the last act. And this might be a little bit contentious. I know some people want to do it another way, but for us, what we found was when something works, the instinct is to chase the biggest market you can find, usually overseas. I'd argue the opposite. Solve a real problem right here first, prove it works, get a customer paying for it, and now you've got something you can take internationally with revenue and proof already behind you. Going global first and working backwards is a much harder and riskier road to take. Cool. So the last act, thanks to asking the right questions, we got to a point in the company where we had so many projects and products going on that we kind of kept asking ourselves this question. It's like, how do we actually decide what to work on? And once you can make almost any recombinant protein, everything looks like a good idea. And a small team has limited bench time. And for years, we sort of chose these products and projects on gut feel. And you just heard how well that went. So we built a tool, and it's called the Commercial Evaluator. And its whole job is to take the decision out of our gut and put it on paper. Every single mistake in this talk, chasing scale we didn't have, building before we validated, guessing on the price, every one was a gut feel decision. So here's roughly how the Commercial Evaluator works. Every opportunity has to make it past a series of commercial gates. So from your idea and the problem all the way through to quality control, certifications, and cold chain logistics. So at each gate, we scored 1 to 5 on things that actually decide whether it will succeed. And the tool gives us a verdict: go, review, stop. How badly does the customer need this? The pain. Can we actually make it? The feasibility. Does it fit in what we're good at? Will it scale? What are the margins? And so much more. Each one is weighted because some matter more than others. And these aren't abstract business school categories. This is literally our scar tissue. Every one of those criteria, based off a mistake we've made, turned into a question we now have to answer before we spend a cent. Capacity, that was the sugar wall. Pain and feasibility, the growth factor disaster. We turned our worst moments into a checklist. And what's really cool is that once you score every project the same way, something quite powerful happens. You can put the whole portfolio on a single map. So you can see on the graph here, reward runs up the chart, and success runs on the x-axis. And suddenly the standouts are obvious, and the crowded corner of low value, high effort projects was also obvious. And so now when someone asks, what should we be working on? We don't shrug and go with our favorite or go with our gut feeling. We've got a priority score and a risk-adjusted value for each one of those projects or products. And we work the best bets first. So lesson 4 and the last lesson is decide with a scorecard, not a gut feel. Write down your criteria, weight them, and let the weak scores kill a project before it costs you years. It honestly would have saved us 2 years. So where is Immobazyme today? We now generate revenue across 4 different industries: food and bev, paper and pulp, cosmetics, and ag tech. We are a profitable company, which is really exciting. And yeah, the difference where we are right now is that we're choosing where to go next deliberately, using that same problem-led model and the same commercial evaluator. And next up for us is nutraceuticals, and on the horizon is pharmaceuticals. So if I were to start over, or at least talk to the 3 of us back in 2019, I'd say 3 things. One is lead with the problem, not the science. It does not matter how elegant your protein is or your solution is if nobody actually wants it. So start from a customer's pain point, not from the bench. 2 is fit your scale. Pick problems you can serve at the size you are now, not the size you imagine being in 10 years' time. And sure, there are contract manufacturing organizations, and you can go that route. We do contract manufacture some of our enzymes, but that comes with its own complications. And yeah. 3 is validate before you build. Find someone willing to pay before you make the thing, not afterwards. So for everyone attending this presentation, where would I start on Monday, or rather, where would I start tomorrow? If you're sitting there with a technology and an idea, here's what I would do. 1 is go talk to 10 potential customers before you even touch the lab. Ask them what problem they'd genuinely pay to solve, and then listen more than you pitch. Once you've done that, pick one of those problems that you've just heard and keep it small. One painful thing that you can actually deliver at your scale. Go really deep in this, not wide. The third thing is prototype fast and keep your IP. Take on little risk to put something real in their hands and then iterate on what they tell you. And 4, score every opportunity. Write down your criteria, weight them, and let the numbers choose, not your excitement. So yeah, that was our long way around to a customer. 4 pivots, a freezer full of growth factors that nobody wanted, and a tool that finally taught us how to choose. Yeah, I'm really happy to get into any of it. And I just want to say thank you to Hannah and the whole OneBio team for having me on here.
Thanks so much for the intro, Nick. I really love the acts that you broke it into, and it really does show the kind of long road that you have to walk to kind of get to this stage. I think obviously when we speak about these things in conversation, it always sounds so oversimplified and so kind of, oh, go find your customer and chat to them about your problem. But actually seeing it in real practice and how long that takes and how many iterations and how much it can cost you if you make mistakes along the way, it's super interesting. And I think what you guys have done at Immobazyme is really inspiring. And it's exciting to see you guys profitable and growing in a beautiful new location as well. So congratulations on the whole journey.
Thank you.
In the chats, John T, I see that you said, following on from the previous session with the other Nick, that step 4 of the biodesign process speaks to many of the similar lessons that we spoke about now. So please, John T, if I can ask that you share these links in the Slack channel as well on the resources page, then everyone will be able to go back and look through these things too. But cool. So following on from what you said, Nick, I wanted to ask kind of, as I said, it always sounds so simplified and you've kind of laid out the whole journey. You say that this kind of pivotal point was sitting down with this big food manufacturer and really actually starting to understand some of their pain points. That's really not easy to do in the early stages, I can imagine. So how did you guys go about approaching customers? Was that easy? Yeah, kind of how did you get your foot in the door in the first place?
Yeah, so getting in the room with the right people is one of the biggest challenges. With that one specifically, we got a warm introduction from someone that we've been working with. And it obviously helped that we'd sort of been around for 5 years at that point in time. So, they kind of knew about us, which also helps. In the beginning, it was really, really difficult. You had to find someone that knew someone that knew someone that could, give you a warm introduction via email. And then you would, they look at you and you're like, you're a startup of 3 people and you haven't raised anything. Like, why do we even need to have a conversation with you? So it is really difficult in the beginning. I think one of the things that I would have probably done a little bit more is a lot more engaging on social media like LinkedIn. That's a great place to meet professionals that, you never know what could happen. And then cold outreach. Like if you send 50 emails every day, you're going to get a conversation with somebody. And that's kind of part of the grit that you have to endure in the beginning. Is like you're going to get so many rejections, but you just need one person, and then it's going to grow into something else. Now we're super fortunate that we have a great network, at least locally, that if we want to have a meeting with someone, we can, talk to someone that can help us set that up. But in the beginning, it was really, really difficult.
And are you guys still, obviously, you kind of gave your opinion of go local before you go global. Are you guys at that stage yet? Are you still really trying to kind of perfect or optimize what you have locally? Or are you really looking at global markets and partners?
So two of our products are going global as we speak. So a lot of companies are trialing them, which is really exciting. It's That's kind of part of the reason why I say go local first, or at least for our business model, is like we make something very specific to the clients and then we trial it with them. We'll go back and forth until we perfect the product, which is what we did with the local manufacturer. To do that with the international manufacturer, like let's say Nestle, they're not going to give you the time to like do that whole process. So we perfected the product, and now we can go to the Nestle, for example, and say this is exactly how it works. Um, so yeah, we're going international. That's the next challenge that we're facing. Like to sell locally is quite easy. There seems to be like a trust within your local, kinsmanship. But to go international is really difficult. Like people don't know you, they don't trust you. So you really have to prove it in your certifications. We have to get all the certifications required. We have to have good quality control, good documentation. We have to have a good product data sheet, a good SDS. And then they're like, okay, cool. Well, we'll accept a free sample to trial it. And then it takes them months to trial it. And the data that they get back from it might not even be that informative for us. So it's like hard to foster a relationship with them.
Hmm.
But yeah,
And a lot of getting into the international market, has it been you guys going out there and really trying to be there in person? Or has it just been the same kind of cold outreach or trying to get warm intros online, a bit
yeah,
of everything?
a bit of everything. We haven't done much traveling. And I think that's something that we'll probably do a lot of next year, hopefully. But yeah, my sort of approach at the moment is cold reach, big companies. I use Apollo, so you can get access to everyone's emails that you need to. And then LinkedIn. LinkedIn's really good. If you've got a
Hmm.
up voice and you're passionate about what you're trying to solve, you will definitely get at least 10 to 20 people on a good campaign
Hmm.
that want to engage with you on the product. So those are our two main approaches. And then obviously your network. That's the third one.
I mean, it's super interesting because this is obviously something that we internally at OneBio, we hear all the time, and a lot of the founders that we speak to have the same pain point and are a lot earlier stage than you guys are. But it's this kind of being a really early stage startup and trying to do the customer discovery, trying to do the kind of problem understanding before you start building. It's that building that trust, right? No big food company or pharma company wants to sit down with someone who hasn't really built something yet or doesn't have any proof points yet. So it's like this chicken or the egg scenario. Okay, I want to go out and understand my problem, and I want to go and chat to the customers and who will pay for this to really understand where the pain points are, but I can't get my foot in the door. So something, I mean, we've been speaking about for so long is that's exactly why we want to build the ecosystem. And you see it internationally all the time. A trusted ecosystem often gets companies in kind of the conversation a lot earlier. So hopefully it's something we can build on, and that's why we're trying to have these conversations of bringing everyone into one room. Then hopefully once there's a trusted ecosystem, people start looking at that and trusting the founders coming out of it. So yeah, I know you guys kind of preceded all of this and really did it yourselves and paved the way for quite a lot of this. So it's awesome. We got a question a little bit more broad about your journey in the chat. So Xander says, thanks for a great talk. Can you comment on the process of spinning out from Stellenbosch University? If you had to do it all over again, would you take the same path?
Sure. Thanks for the questions, Xander. I must be careful what I say. So the journey with Stellenbosch University was great. They really helped us, that initial technology that we developed as students under the IPR Act. It belongs to Stellenbosch University and the government. And so they really helped us in patenting that technology and took us through that whole, starting off with a disclosure and then, drafting patents and all of that. These were things that we'd never done before. So they were very useful and helpful in that regard. And then we obviously spun out through Stellenbosch University, and we got an instant access license to that technology. So even though we were inventors of it, we have to license that technology from them. But it was an exclusive licensing agreement, and it was basically the start of what Immobazyme was all about. And so they also put us in at the Launch Lab facility, which is the sort of accelerator facility just outside Stellenbosch University. And yeah, those 12 months were fundamental to Immobazyme. It really taught us a lot. I mean, we were sitting down with MOIs and SHAs and stuff that we didn't even know about at the time. But Stellenbosch University and Launch Lab really took our hand and helped us through that whole process. So it was great. If you had to do it all over again, would you take the same path? I mean, if I was a student, I wouldn't have an alternative to that path. If you develop a technology that you want to commercialize as a student, it belongs to the university. And they do offer a lot of support that you need as a student. So I wouldn't take a different path. But if I wasn't a student and I came up with a technology, I would do it independently. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, awesome. A side note, Jonty asked if you mentioned the Apollo tool that you use, I think it was for emails. Is it apollo.io? Do you know the...
Yes, it's apollo.io.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Keep popping the questions in the chat, everyone. Okay, I think that's the end of it. Awesome. So yeah, I mean, another thing that came to mind as you were going through your whole journey was this kind of like trying to understand which market your technology fits. Like you said, you pivoted from looking at kind of food and bev, and then making all these kind of the growth factor crisis, but then realizing, okay, at least we can pivot and go into kind of cosmetics. So the importance of just being dynamic and really understanding where you can fit into in these various markets is something that sometimes people might miss as well. If you have a very narrow focus of what you're building this technology for and where you want it to fit or what problem you want it to solve, there might be another problem in a different industry that this could fit into quite easily. So kind of what are the conversations between the three of you, the co-founders, and how you go about pivoting and being dynamic and trying to really understand what is going on in the market? Because as a scientist, I can imagine you're not always aware of the trends that are going on in, I don't know, the cosmetics industry per se, or whichever industry it is. So how do you guys keep yourselves informed, and what are the conversations like behind closed doors? What are your brainstorming sessions like?
Sure. So just to touch on that point, it's something that we see in a lot of companies that have academics sort of running the show or on the board. That's, all around their research. So the research that they've worked on for the last 20 years of their life, and how unwillingly they are to pivot when they realize that maybe the market it's not the right time for them, or the market doesn't want their product, or it's nothing against the science. The science is obviously sound. It's just that the product is not going to work in the market. And you see these companies, they'll just work for the next 3 years trying to push this product into the market, and it does not work. And eventually the companies collapse. And so how we looked at it, and sort of investors hated us for this reason, was we thought, well, we're not going to bet on one product and sort of one project. We're going to do 4 or 5. And if 4 of them fail, that's fine. At least one will technically succeed. And that's not great for the business because you spread yourself a bit too thin. But it's also great for the business is that you're de-risking yourself. And it's a catch-22, obviously. Thankfully, we have quite a modular platform, in the sense that if you just change the gene in the beginning, you get a different protein, but it's all the same infrastructure. It's the same pipeline. It's the same personnel. So we betted on a couple of things, and we betted on products that we could diversify them into different industries. So growth factors is a great one because it was cultivated meat, it's cosmetic industry, it's mammalian cell culture, it's for academic labs, you name it. So yeah, that was our kind of approach into like finding product market fit. And in that process, we found our business model fit. What we are like to get market insights now, it's still the problem-led approach, but it's also looking at what influential people are saying in the industry. Like if you look at peptides across Google search, TikTok, and Instagram, they're up 300, 400% from last year. So that's obviously like the commercial like bulb is going off, and it's like, okay, well, that's the next thing. If you look at it in like terms of food and bev, it's clean labeling. They don't want to use, these xanthan gums and all these things that people don't want to put in their body. It's now novel enzymes that can do that on the raw materials themselves and still get the same properties. If you cosmetic industry, I mean, that touches on peptides and whatnot. So yeah, we just try and keep up and talk to as many people as possible. That's, I would say that's my answer.
And I know that kind of you're working quite a lot with, like you said, the whole local landscape. So you're working a lot with, I would say, kind of smaller local brands, because that allows you to have this iteration for phase a little bit. You mentioned obviously big companies don't want to pay for R&D. They don't really want to pay for the research to be done. They want to be sold a product that is actually solving their problem. So do you find working with the kind of smaller local brands allows some of that R&D to be done in the process? It gives a bit more of a kind of longer timeline and for you to work with the customer directly to really solve their problem. And then you can hopefully have something that you can go to a bigger global company with.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, when we choose a local company to work with, it's not the smallest guy, but it's also not
Hmm.
necessarily the biggest guy. It's like the second or third largest player in that industry. Um, and they are very receptible to this kind of approach. So they lead new product development, or their lead R&D scientist will sit with them and we'll engage, for the next couple of weeks on the problem and what the solution will look like, and go back and forth on the dosage and the parameters and all of that. And they are super receptible to that kind of approach. And with those learnings, we can then go to an international player. It would be impossible to go to a Nestle or a L'Oreal and try and do that approach. It's just not going to work. They also have, quite large internal R&D capabilities. I mean, L'Oreal's got 4,000 scientists within its entire group. So they're not going to want to do this kind of approach. But if you can prove it with a local company, a new technology, a new enzyme, or whatever it is, and you can, make or buy paper, and you can flaunt it a little bit on LinkedIn, you can then go to the L'Oreal or the Nestle and say,
Hmm.
hey, look at this. This is something, and then they will engage with you on it. I think also it's about learning the process itself. For example, like we knew we had to get ISO 22000 for the food manufacturer. That's an obvious one. But we didn't know that we had to get kosher and halal. And if we went straight to the international guys, they would have been like, where's your halal and kosher? And if you say we don't have it, they're going to be like, well, then we're not even going to talk. So we found out that we had to get kosher and halal, and it actually took quite a long time. It's like 6 to 8 months of work just to get those two certifications.
Hmm.
So that's part of the learning curve, and that's going to be different for whatever industry you go into. So say if it's medical devices, ISO 13485, I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of new learnings that we get when we start doing that, which we've just started. And that's not even to say if you're going into GMP manufacturing, which is, a 5 to 10 year goal, those learnings are going to be on a completely another level. So it's nice to sort it out locally and then take those learnings internationally so that there's no doubt of trust in their mind. They know you're ticking all the boxes, and it's just basically now approving the product.
Hmm. This is exactly kind of something I mentioned in the first session, in the kind of setting the scene of this conversation, is really understanding the whole pipeline of kind of who is your end user, who is your problem actually trying to solve for? Is it the end user or is it the customer? Who is your customer? How is that going to affect your technology, and how does that kind of fit into their system? And then who is the kind of decider and the influencer of how your products are sold? So the regulations behind it, what is kind of trending on the market? Like you said, with cosmetics, they really want clean label, um,
Yeah.
etc. So I think as you go, it's such a complicated thing to dissect that all of these pieces fit into it, and really understanding that for each industry and each customer that you're trying to serve is really can be a long road to walk with a lot of pivoting.
Yeah.
Um, Back to, sorry, did you have a comment? There's some questions
No,
in the
I
chat
just
I'll
think
go
it's
through.
so how we approach that genuinely is um, on Apollo, I will search for, MPDs, senior research scientists, head of R&D, the CSO, and I will send them our product data sheet and our SDSs and all of that. And they're the first person that is going to be the gatekeeper to a new technology. And so convincing them is the first part. And then what we would do is we would send samples to them for free. This is in the international market, and they will trial it. And most of the time they'll love it and they'll say, cool. Now they'll start pulling in their CEO or some director, maybe the CFO or something like that. And then we'll start engaging on the terms. So whether that's, pricing, minimum order quantities, whatever. And so now the decision moves from that person to someone that's in the finances within that company. And then finally, when they approve that, you get put some, account manager will handle you, and you generally don't even talk to the rest of the people anymore. So that's generally the flow that we look at. And so if you want to check out Apollo, go try that flow as well. Don't reach out to someone that's, too low on the hierarchy within the company, but also don't go straight to the CEO. They just don't have the time for that kind of engagement. You want to reach out to someone that's actually like really interested and curious with the solution that you have. So that would be my recommendation there.
Hmm. I really love that you guys have kind of taken your few mistakes that you repeated a couple of times and then built tools to make this kind of market-driven research or market-driven approach
Yeah.
systematic and kind of ingrained in your decision making at Immobazyme, just so that you can prevent these mistakes. And I think as like humans, we normally think we've learned from our mistakes, but sometimes there's so much room for that kind of excitement era, like you mentioned. You have a new customer, or there's new potential on the market, or you've kind of made a new scientific discovery that you hope could fit into something. And we let that take manage all of our decisions rather than actually going back to the drawing board. So I think it's really cool how you guys have built a system around your decision making. It's something that we speak about as well with a few of our other founders. how do you really make kind of an optimized process of decision making and eliminate a lot of your human error out of that. So yeah, thanks for sharing the kind of behind the scenes of that thinking. I'm going to quickly go back to the chat. Stephen asked, now that you guys have increased your capabilities slash capacity, are you going to go back to readdress the issue you were originally looking into?
On the sugar side, I'm assuming.
I'm assuming,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so we actually partnered up with the CSRI, the Industrial Biocatalysis Hub, and they've got access to 1,000-liter bioreactors. That's obviously still probably not near big enough to solve that solution. It is something that we want to move towards. I think how we view it is right in the beginning, we were doing that really high value, low volume stuff. And now we're sort of linearly expanding those capabilities. So if you think of it, it's like in the beginning, it's maybe, a couple 100 milligrams that we could make a month, and we would have a 99% margin on that, but we would be selling so little of it. Now we're at the scale where we can make maybe 100 grams a month, and we're selling quite a lot of that, but maybe at a slightly lower margin. If you're entering into the food and bev space, you can't add more than 10% on the wholesale price for your solution. That's just never going to work. So the sugar industry is so big that we still got quite a bit of a way to go in terms of scaling. And those margins are like 30 to 40% maybe. But the volume that you're selling at, it's just insane. So there's still obviously a huge potential there. And having a thermostable dextrinase is super important because they operate at like 80 to 90 degrees. But yeah, it's difficult.
Awesome. So if anyone has any more questions, we've got a couple more minutes. I just wanted to mention, sorry, some logistical things I saw in the chat. Someone asked what the intention with Slack is. We've created the community Slack so that we can kind of continue the conversation in between sessions. It's obviously the way that this is structured is that we can't really see the audience and we can't have conversations in between. It would just take too long. So we really want you guys to connect. Nick, you and I have spoken so many times about kind of how valuable it would have been for you guys in the beginning if you had an ecosystem, if you had people problem solving with you in the early stages. I know that you guys and Dom were actually a part of the OneBio conversation way back in the day when this was conceptualized. And that's kind of the intention of this, right? So let's try and solve problems together and chat to each other about our journey so that we can save a lot more time and have a bit of a community as you go. It's a long road to walk, so have a little bit of fun along the way. So the Slack is really for you guys to speak to each other, to make plans. We'll be dropping some community events in there, hopefully doing the Cape Town thing, which is going for some runs or hikes so everyone can see each other in person. We'll also be making some plans for site visits, hopefully to Immobazyme. We'll chat to you guys, bringing some people out to see your space. So yeah, that's kind of the answer. But otherwise, I'm going to start closing it off. If anyone has any questions, now is your chance. But Nick, thank you so much. I love the Immobazyme story. I obviously know you guys personally from way back, so it's good to see friends doing awesome things. And something we have offered in our previous sessions, which I can chat to you afterwards, is if anyone has specific follow-on questions for Immobazyme or for Nick and his journey, please let me know, chat to me, and depending on the demand, we can reach out to you and potentially have a follow-on Q&A or send you a few follow-on questions that people want answered. So I see one more question's come through. Oh, Jonty said, first, Nick, happy to share my experience with 13.5 if you're interested to chat. And then also said, what are you implementing ISO 13485 for?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. So our next product that we're releasing is called proliferate. It's a one-to-one FBS serum-free replacement. So what we've noticed is that importing FBS is really difficult. It's really expensive, and batch-to-batch variation is, just messing scientists around. And we've made all these growth factors for cultivated meat, and so we've been spending close to 18 to 24 months developing this product, and it's basically a formulation of all the different growth factors. So that's the FBS, and then we've partnered up with Gibco on the DMEM, and then we made a structural attachment factor as well, so you can grow it on the monolayer. And so that's both then suspension and monolayer cell cultivation, and we've tested it on the top 10 most used cell lines, so Hector, Chove, and all of that. And our distributor wants us to be ISO 13485 for this specific product, because obviously some of the guys might potentially use it for lateral flows or making reagents that go into medical devices. So I can't remember what the classification is that we're filing for, but it's basically just for reagents.
Awesome. Chanti said, thanks so much. Makes complete sense. One more question I have. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, you guys have a big presence online and doing a lot of talks. Can you mention some of the exciting partners that you are working with locally and potentially internationally? I'm
the
not
bio,
sure if you can. If not, no comment, but go
the
for
bio,
it.
the biotech world is sort of plagued with this misty wall, and no one really knows what's going on. And but most of the guys we can't actually talk about. I can say that there's going to be a big announcement in September with a massive local cosmetic company where they're going to be implementing our growth factors in all of their products. And I know there will be many people in the chat that use their products as right now. So that's really exciting. And then that one we will obviously post about. I'm actually giving a talk next week regarding peptides and growth factors in the cosmetic industry with a company called Oyster. They use AI to scan your face and then tell you which products you should use. So that could be really cool. If you want to check it out, you can go to our LinkedIn page and subscribe. There's only a couple more seats left. And then, yeah, everyone else, I'm not allowed to say, unfortunately, it sucks. But yeah.
Keep your secrets. It's all right. We'll wait. We'll wait for the announcement. But it's really exciting. I'm happy to hear that. That this whole journey has kind of gotten to the point where you were hoping for in the beginning. Profitable, looking at going international, working with some really exciting partners. So everyone, if you do want to follow along, I'm gonna pop the Immobazyme Immobazyme website in the chat, so you can go straight to check them out. If you want to follow along Nick's journey, follow him on LinkedIn. As he said, it's an incredible tool to know what's happening. We have most of our communications there as well. And then, like I said, if you have follow-on questions for the Immobazyme team or for Nick himself, just message us at our info email, now I forget it, info@innovation.onebio.africa. It's very long. And we can either set up a follow-on or I'll forward the questions to Nick and get him to answer more of these questions. Otherwise, come and see him in person at some of our Biotech and Beers. Hopefully we'll rope you into coming to more of our events.
I'm coming to the next one that's in Stellenbosch. That's in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, awesome. We have a Biotech and Beers in Stellenbosch edition for once, taking it to Stellenbosch so that we can be more inclusive of everyone and not just have it in Cape Town. For those who aren't in the Western Cape, though, I am sorry that most of our in-person events are in the Western Cape, but hopefully that will change in the coming years. Awesome. So that wraps up the second session of our commercialization series. Thank you, Nick. That was really awesome. Lovely to hear your story. And to everyone who stayed with us for the whole thing, thank you very much. And we'll see you at the next one in 2 weeks. Awesome. Cheers. Thanks, Nick.
Cheers. Bye.